Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and as I'm sure you've noticed recently, I've been playing around with different formats for my videos and different setups, and one of the things that I've added is the bookshelf. And a number of you have commented on that and said, we want to know more about the bookshelf. Do a video where you talk about the books that you have. And that's what I'm doing tonight. But it's not just taking you on a tour of the bookshelf, because as it so happens, there's a lot of titles here which are classics of occult literature in the Western esoteric tradition, which are essential reading for anyone who wants to explore Western esotericism. So they serve as a curriculum of sorts in that respect. They're not just there because I like them personally. But there are some other books here which are more specific to my own path on the spiritual journey and my own interests. So that'll give you a bit more insight into my personal journey, I suppose. So that's what we're going to be covering tonight. A lot of very interesting volumes here for those who are interested in such things. So grab a cup of tea or a scotch or whatever it is you're drinking and get comfortable, and I'm going to show you my rare book collection. So I think it's probably easiest if I start from left to right, top to bottom. That seems like a logical way of doing this. So let's start from here. This, of course, is a classic of modern occultism. This is Liber 777. It's not just 777, it's Sephiroth as well. But basically what this is a book of correspondences. So when you want to do a magic spell and you want to construct a ritual from scratch, and you want to construct a ritual for, say, Jupiter, for example, for abundance, for expansion, you want to get a certain type of incense, a certain color of robe, or perhaps altar cloth or candles. You want to get certain types of symbols to put around the ritual space. You want certain god names to use in your invocations. These are all things you need to think about when you're constructing a ritual. And to help you do that, there's some wonderful tables of correspondence in here, which tell you exactly what to look for. So if you might have seen this before, if you're new to Western esotericism and magic, this would be Jupiter here, number 4, because of course Chesed is the 4th Sephira and represents Jupiter. And so this is all Kabbalistic down here. According to the planetary or zodiacal attributions of the tree of life, the Sephirot or the paths, each row represents a different archetype, if you will, for different types of magic. And then each column might give you sets of gods from different pantheons, which correspond to that archetype, as well as different incenses, different colors, and other things. So this is essential for practical magic and ceremonial magic more generally. Angel and the Abyss. So this is a book by J. Daniel Gunter. So to explain who he is, he was quite high up in one of the lineages of the AA, the so-called Motta lineage. There was speculation that he was the praemonstrator of the Motta AA. I don't know if that's true or not, but he wrote a lot of material on the AA initiatory system and shed a lot of light on certain topics within that system, and really in a comprehensive way that few people had done before. So 2 of his books, which explain some of the more confusing parts of the AA initiatory system, are Initiation in the Aeon of the Child, which I unfortunately don't have, but also The Angel and the Abyss. And as the name suggests, it covers the two seminal initiation experiences on the path of the AA, namely the knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel and the crossing of the abyss. So there's a lot of wonderful stuff in here. It's quite interesting, quite an interesting volume that adds a lot of depth to one's understanding of some of the key initiations in the path of the AA. Next, we have a book by Damien Eccles, Angels and Archangels. So this is not as well known as some of the volumes here, but quite good, I think. Sets out the basics of angelic magic in quite an accessible way, I think. Has a lot of really cool sigil designs in there for various archangels that you can summon. And this has been useful to me because sometimes you have to fill in the gaps with certain types of angelic magic. Sometimes you have to go looking for the correspondences, or sometimes you have to think of what the seal of that angel might look like and design it yourself. But Damien's done a lot of that work for you here. And this has been useful for me, particularly in my Sandalphon working and my Metatron working, both of which were very helpful to me on my spiritual path for different reasons. Sandalphon working I've spoken about recently. The Metatron working I'll speak about again quite soon in one of my videos, because it's borne fruit in an important way in the last few months. Not quite as overtly visible in the world as the result of the Sandalphon working was, as you might expect, given that Sandalphon is closest to Malkuth, but nevertheless. Both of those angels have helped me a lot in the last year or so, and this is probably the main text that I use to work with them. So next we have some Eliphas Levi. Another very important figure in the Western esoteric tradition, was quite influential on the Golden Dawn, was quite influential on Aleister Crowley. Crowley claimed to be the reincarnation of Levi. But this is one of his main texts, The History of Magic. Quite a good volume, you can see the design of it. This figure on the front has to do with the Grand Arcanum and cracking the Grand Arcanum. There's another figure in Transcendental Magic, or actually a series of figures which go together with this and help you kind of crack the meaning of the Arcanum. Maybe I'll go into that in another video. But as the name suggests, this is a history of magic going all the way back to ancient times, and it's quite good. Levi's other main text, of course, is Transcendental Magic, which covers on more of the practical aspects of ceremonial magic, which I don't have here, but I would highly recommend. And it introduces a lot of key concepts that still remain important in Western ceremonial magic today. The next one I'd like to show you is this one. This is The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary. Don't be fooled by the size of this volume. It is quite a powerful book. It packs a punch, and this is actually one of the first books that Crowley read as he was being introduced to the world of the occult, and it blew his mind because it introduced him to the idea that there is a secret brotherhood of light of highly initiated individuals, which get called masters in theosophy and the like, and that these secret chiefs were behind all of the esoteric orders throughout history and were kind of pushing human evolution from behind the scenes. And this was an intriguing idea to Crowley, and he wanted to find the masters. And that's what set him on his path to the Golden Dawn. And this is really what started it all. He heard about it when he was on one of his hiking trips, and it was all systems go from there, really. It's quite an interesting little volume, and good to have in one's collection, simply because of the historical significance of this particular book in terms of the development of Western magic. Next to Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, there is the Canon by Sterling. This is another book that is significant because of its influence on Crowley. It's significant in its own right, but that's how it became known to me anyway. So this particular book, it's all about sacred geometry, you might say. It's all about the sacredness of certain numbers and how sacred numbers are embedded or hidden in the mysteries of religion. And it's kind of a hidden language for understanding a deeper meaning. So, for example, you've got diagrams like this showing the architecture of a cathedral, the mathematical principles behind that. There's a lot of gematria type stuff, looking at the significance of certain numbers and where they appear in terms of certain measurements of different things relative to one another on different shapes that are significant in the Bible, for example, like the dimensions of the New Jerusalem. And in fact, the diagram of the New Jerusalem in some of the versions of the Canon made its way into Liber ABA, otherwise known as Book 4, and was popularized there. So very interesting for adding understanding of sacred numbers and sacred geometry and how all that relates to some of the more well-known symbols of Western religion. It gives it a more esoteric meaning through the language of number. The next book that I'll show you is one that is more specific to me and my path, not quite as broadly known. This is the Ancestral Grimoire. So this is a book that I picked up because I was interested in doing ancestor work, and there's not really a lot about that in the Western esoteric tradition. This is something that tends to be a bit more pagan, or pagans are more interested in it, but it was something that was becoming increasingly important to me, and where I was being directed on my spiritual path was to look into my ancestral lineages. And as time has gone on, I've come to appreciate the importance of ancestry to the spiritual path more because of what I've learned about DNA and how it's a transmitter, and how certain types of DNA can, if it's awakened, it can open us up to new experiences and actually being able to more easily make contact with the spirit world. And that's something that UAP contactees tend to say as well, as a result of their contact with the beings and the sort of knowledge that they get. That DNA is very important, and manipulating DNA is very important to help humanity reach that full potential. And of course, understanding one's own spiritual nature and magical nature is very much linked to understanding one's bloodlines. There's certain bloodlines that carry certain types of spiritual gifts, and that can often be one of the explanations for why certain people are mediums or certain people are magicians. For example, you get hereditary witches, for example, in addition to, say, having been a wizard or a medium in a past life. But often the two are linked as well, not always. But anyway, in order to understand the source of my own magical potential, I suppose, I was looking a lot into ancestry and looking for a way of doing ancestor work, and this book came into my life. I've been following it kind of loosely. It uses a lot of divinatory methods to help you, get in touch with those ancestors that are trying to tell you something about how their bloodline is influencing you and giving you certain spiritual gifts, passing them down. And so I've been working with this book, and I've identified 4 distinct bloodlines, which have been in part responsible for my magical abilities. So I've been exploring those, and this book has been helping me do that. So maybe I'll talk more about that in another video. Who knows? So the next one is a recent addition. This was one that I bought to get up to speed researching the UAP phenomenon and how it relates to religious experiences. This is the UFO of God by Chris Bledsoe. And I was quite impressed by Bledsoe's account of his experience and how it links in with religion and angels and things like that. Very much a line of inquiry that I've been following myself recently, the connection between the UAP phenomenon throughout history and what we have traditionally described as angels. And so I got this book to try and understand that. And I haven't got very far. I have to say, though, that some of the UFO of God book sounds made up. I know it's supposed to be a true story, but certain parts of the narrative sound fictitious. Make of that what you will. But I know that Chris Bledsoe is well regarded in UAP circles. Some people have their suspicions about him as well. I think that he did have a genuine experience, and he didn't get any clout for telling people about that. If anything, it ostracized him from his Christian community, because Christians love ostracizing people who are different, ironically, given what their savior taught them. Anyway, so I don't think he's making that up, but I think that there are certain elements of the story which are not 100% accurate, let's say. So make of that what you will. I haven't got Diana Pasulka's book American Cosmic here, but I did listen to that, and I found that quite compelling. But I think I need to read the rest of UFO of God before I make a full assessment of it. All right, well, we've reached a very important part of the bookshelf now. These are my books on Enochian magic. So I've got two of Aaron Leach's books here. The Essential Enochian Grimoire and the Angelical Language Volume 1. I haven't got Angelical Language Volume 2, but that's something I've been thinking about adding to my collection one day. These are great texts, great source books if you want to understand the Jebethel ritual, which has been a big part of my life. If you've seen my videos on that, this was the book that I purchased in 2014, which set me on my journey of my own attempts to reconstruct the Jebethel ritual. And Leach's work wasn't the only inspiration for that, but it was a big inspiration. And he's been very thorough in his research into the Enochian system and really going into detail and reconstructing a lot of things that we didn't understand before. So very good books on Enochian magic. I would highly recommend them. That's the Essential Enochian Grimoire. Looks like that. It's got the woodcut of probably a scene from the Book of Revelation on the front, my version. Similar thing again with the Angelical Language. Would highly recommend both of these. The next book on Enochian magic that I have here is The Lost Art of Enochian Magic by John DeSalvo, PhD. So I have to say, I am more impressed by Leach's scholarship on Enochian magic, but this one still has quite a bit of useful information in it. And it lays out quite neatly and succinctly the process that Dee and Kelly went through to get the calls from the tables of Logger, picking out the relevant parts of Dee's journals to explain that. The big issue with this volume, though, is I was talking about the missing triangular table that doesn't ever quite get fully given to D and Kelly, just sort of gets described. John DeSalvo talks about how it's the first table of the missing call, when in fact that's not the case. It's actually in order of sequence of the calls, it's the 49th table. It's the bottommost call, not the topmost missing one. So there's a bit of confusion there. Otherwise, there's some good material in this. I'm not going to knock it. One thing that is really good about DeSalvo's book is that it gives a bit more of a background of magic in the Bible. So it goes beyond just the history of Enochian magic and actually talks about some precedents in the Bible of using the Urim and Thummim, for example, as divination tools, and other examples of biblically mandated magic to set a kind of precedent or a pretext or point out a precursor of later Enochian magic. The next book I'd like to mention is John Dee and the Empire of Angels by Jason Louv. Another very good book on Enochian magic. This is talking about the history of Dee and Kelly's scryings and everything. It also gives some of the background of the forms of occultism that Dee was interested in, like Hermeticism, for example, and Kabbalah, and talks about some of the legacy of Dee and Kelly's workings in the modern occult movement. Very, very good book. But I think the thing that this book really contributes to the topic of Enochian magic is the way it talks about the political side to the whole project of the Enochian Angels and Dee and Kelly, and how so it starts off by, first of all, situating Dee and Kelly within the proper context, not trying to impugn a role to them that they never intended to have for themselves, such as being, precursors of Crowley with his new Aeon or something like that. Situating them very much within Christian magic, which is what they were trying to practice, and also talking about how the political ambitions and the political dreams of Dee really fit into the Enochian project and went hand in hand with it. So, Dee wanted to see a new type of civilization which could unite the world under the worship of the one God. And within that, he saw a role for a new type of religion, what Jason Louv describes as a terminal monotheism that could unite the world and iron out all of the contradictions and conflicts between the previous forms of monotheism. So that was the big dream of Dee, and that's what he saw as his role, and that the angels were pushing him on to do. And the Enochian system was just a part of that process. So very important for understanding the full context of the Enochian magical system. And a lot to think about in terms of the big picture, what working all of these calls and all of these gates and all of these tables might actually be pointing us towards. Next, from among my Enochian volumes, a relatively recent edition. This is the Enochian Workbook, a rarer book, but it goes into some details about the Enochian system in a way that is quite novel, that other books on the topic don't necessarily go into. It probably is quite introductory, and it's got a kind of textbook type layout to it, like a school textbook and answering questions in the book. But a very rare volume, and more a collector's item than anything else, I think. One book that I would really like to add to my Enochian collection is the Ophanic Revelation. That is something that I'm looking into currently. If you've read it and you have a review of it, let me know what you thought of it. The next book that I'd like to talk about is this one here. This is a translation of the Book of Enoch, the first Book of Enoch to be exact. So it's not the only translation of the Book of Enoch, but it's a decent translation. And if you want to know the backstory of Hecalot literature and Merkabah mysticism and even later Enochian magic, and go right back to some of the earlier source books of that, then the Book of Enoch is the place to go. I've spoken about the connection between the books of Enoch and the Enochian system in some of my previous videos, but also very interesting text because it's written like a biblical text, but of course this was excluded from the Bible. Both the Christian and Jewish Bible excluded the Book of Enoch because it was too controversial. So all of them, in fact. But it was very important to a lot of very consequential spiritual movements, such as the Qumran community, where John the Baptist was most likely initiated, where Jesus could have had some contact as well, and just on the development of later forms of Jewish mysticism, such as the Kabbalah. Very consequential text. So definitely one that I'm glad to have in my library. The next book is not to do with Enochian magic, but it's certainly a book that John Dee would appreciate and would see as very much touching upon some themes that he himself has worked into his own life's work and his own spiritual journey and his political machinations, in fact. This is Dominion by Tom Holland. And what this book is, it's very long, but it's a really epic read. And what this is really talking about is cultural Christianity, as it's called today, as someone like Richard Dawkins would say today. The way that it talks about the history of the West after the ministry of Christ and how that influenced and revolutionized the Western world as Christianity spread and ultimately changed the world as we know it and changed the culture so fundamentally that now what we call Western civilization, we can't think of it without thinking within a frame of Christian morality. And even things that we regard as secular, such as human rights and the idea of the sanctity of the rights of the individual, are all things which wouldn't exist without Christian morality. And it's really describing the project of Christianity. So very fascinating, and will give you a new appreciation of the history of Christianity beyond just the modern propaganda about plunging humanity into a dark age. It's just not true. Many of the universities were founded by the church. Many great things were contributed to human civilization by the legacy that was left by the Christ. And this goes into it without proselytizing, without trying to convert anyone to a religion. It just talks about the cultural impacts of Christianity. Okay, we're getting into some weirder volumes now. So let's start with these two. These two volumes are publications of the Gnostic Society, I believe is what they're calling themselves these days. They go by lots of different names. Gnostic Association. Anyway, it's a modern Gnostic school founded by a Latin American man called Samael Aun-Weor, and it's based a lot on the teachings of the Rosicrucians and Theosophy, and sort of repackaged as something new. And it calls itself Gnostic and kind of considers the Pistis Sophia as its sacred scripture, but very much centered around this man, Samael Aun-Weor. I've been a part of Gnostic groups in the past, and they've contributed to my spiritual development together with the OTO and the AA, although in the case of Gnosticism in a very different direction. It's kind of a mixed bag exploring those schools, but there was some useful wisdom that came out of it. And what these two books do, the Major Mysteries and the Three Mountains, is they outline a path of initiation, which is the path of Christification. So it is a process whereby one builds up the various spiritual bodies and goes through the same stages as Christ went through in his life, but in a symbolic way, and combines that with some other techniques, which I'm not going to go into, but all of that is to try and purify the individual, dissolve the ego, and turn the individual into a vessel for the Christ, and to fully incarnate the Christ and become a Christ themselves. So that's kind of the premise of that path of initiation. These two books lay that out, and they draw a lot from other theosophical sources like Alice Bailey and Annie Besant. I'm going to be doing a talk about that topic in a week at the Theosophical Society, which will be my next video. But these are the books that I read to understand that path a bit more. But actually, the thing that has really helped me to understand the path laid out here is going back to the source material by Annie Besant and Alice Bailey. So that is something that I would say about that. And you just got to be a bit careful with Samael Aun-Weor, because he presented himself as someone who had completed this path and was a fully awakened master and a Christ, a living Christ. But he was clearly very arrogant and very full of his own ego right up until the end, even though he tried to pass himself off as some kind of enlightened Christ figure. And he's got some pretty terrible takes on certain topics. And some of the groups that teach his material can be very cult-like. So that's just a word of warning for anyone who might be wanting to explore this particular school and this particular set of teachings. The next books that I'll show you are these ones. These two books are on chaos magic. This is a Peter Carroll book, not Peter Carroll's best work. That would be Liber and the Psychonaut. And this is a book by Andre Vitamus, but very good basic texts on chaos magic, teach you the basics of chaos magic. And although I'm not a chaos magician myself, I found the way that chaos magic deconstructs things and then puts them back together again to be quite useful and quite a refreshing approach to ceremonial magic, compared to just people rote learning things and then doing them by book and never questioning why. So I keep them on my bookshelf for that reason. So this next book is definitely one of the more important ones in my collection. This is Gems from the Equinox. This is almost all of the texts that you will need if you're walking the AA path. It's pretty much almost everything that you need from various AA curricula. So it's got Liber E, Liber O, Star Ruby, Star Sapphire, Liber Enoch, which has got all of the basics of Enochian magic in it. It's got Liber Samic in there. It's got absolutely everything. It's got some of the holy books in there. It's got the Vision and the Voice in there. So it's just jam-packed full of very useful information for anybody who's interested in the AA curriculum. And there's an interesting story about this book, actually, because it came to me. It's not one that I sought out myself. So I was at a party quite a few years back now. And, as I often do at parties, I kind of got socially exhausted and wanted some me time, and went off by myself and came across the girl whose house it was as bookshelf, and noticed this book and was thumbing through it. And she found me and noticed and said, "Oh, I feel like you need to have this book. I want you to take this book." So that's how this became mine, and it's been instrumental in in my own spiritual path. So sometimes the universe just gifts you things like that. The next book, not as well read as some of the others, but still relevant to my spiritual path. This is The Fourth Way, The Teachings of G.I. Gurdjieff. So this is talking a lot about the work on oneself as set out by Gurdjieff, which has been an important part of my own spiritual journey, kind of related to shadow work, but kind of is bigger than that as well. But a very underrated part of the spiritual path, which I talk about when I can, but people don't tend to be interested in, unfortunately. But I wanted to have Gurdjieff represented up there because it is an essential part of the spiritual path, the work on oneself, the dissolution of the ego. The next book from my collection to show you is the Book of Runes. This is by Ralph Bloom. So I was never really into runes very much, but my late Reiki master, Travis, was really into it, and lent me one of his, well, actually gave me his book on runes. This is one of the better ones for understanding the true meanings of the runes. And so as I've been approaching runes as one of my more favored forms of divination, this particular book has been very useful in helping me to understand the meanings of those runes. All right, the next book is another classic of occult literature. This is the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. I've pulled this one out a few times, particularly recently. This is the Mather's translation, not the best translation, but still decent. And this is a cover design from the 1970s. So this book has been around. You can see the Abramelin squares set out. Some of them are incomplete. Some later scholars have had a go at actually fully reconstructing the squares. Those are some unused squares that I created when I was creating the Abramelin squares, which I'm using as bookmarks. What a project that was. But this has got everything in it. This has got all the books of Abramelin, and it's what I used for my 4 Princes of Evil working. I referred to it, I don't know if it was this particular volume, but this is one of the books that I referred to when I was constructing my own ritual to attain knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, and just a very important book in the corpus of Western esoteric literature. So I would highly recommend it. But maybe go for the Den and Guth translation instead would be my recommendation. All right, next we have The Golden Dawn, another massive tome. The Golden Dawn by Israel Regardie. And this goes through everything that the Golden Dawn taught that you can possibly imagine. There's stuff about the various initiations in there. There's material from the various knowledge lectures, some really cool diagrams like the Garden of Eden before and after the fall, one of my personal favorites. An important teaching of the Golden Dawn initiations. Maybe I'll go into this one day. But yeah, it's just got information on absolutely everything to do with the Golden Dawn tradition. So anything titled The Golden Dawn by Israel Regardie will be the same or a similar volume to this. And if you're interested in the Golden Dawn, this is really the book that you need. Next, we have another classic of occult literature. This is the Hermetica, or better known as the Corpus Hermeticum, a series of philosophical texts in one volume. And this was really the key text of Hermeticism. So it's important to understand for that reason.
one of the key streams of Western esotericism, together with Jewish mysticism and Gnostic Christianity, for really shaping the Western esoteric tradition. So that's why the Hermetica is up there.
And on the topic of going right back to the source material, the conversation we had here when I was talking about the Book of Enoch, the book of the fall of the Watchers, and the knowledge that the angels imparted to Enoch, we have the books that did make the cut. This is my Jewish study Bible. So this is the Old Testament, essentially, but it's without the Christian spin, a translation that is much more true to the original meaning of those texts, and it contains a lot of rabbinical commentary, which sheds a meaning on those texts that you wouldn't get from a Christian Bible commentary, and I think gets closer to the authentic meaning of those texts. And this is something that I've been studying quite a lot in the last year, as I talk about in some of my videos over the past year. The next book in my collection is The Mages by Francis Barrett. So it's just a really cool looking book. You've got some seals on the front and the back. This particular volume is very big though. And this is another classic text of Western esotericism, although Barrett himself wasn't very original. His book is a compilation of a lot of earlier occult texts and occult information, such as that of Cornelius Agrippa. And so, but it's a good kind of summary and collation of a lot of classic occult information. Like, for example, you've got this here, the different magical alphabets that you can use in the constructing of sigils. They're all just Hebrew, but using different versions of the letters. But there's useful stuff about that in there, and things about the spirits and intelligences of the different planets and the Kameas of the different planets. So again, a lot of fundamental occult information can be found in this text. All right, we're coming to the end now, and there's more classic occult texts to cover here. So these are the Keys of Solomon. The Greater and the Lesser Key of Solomon. So I've spoken about these books before in my video on Solomonic magic. The Greater Key of Solomon is the source of all of those famous seals and talismans of the various planets. It's also known as the book that Crowley used in his experiments for visibility, but it's most well known for these quite striking looking talismans, and gives instructions for the consecration of those talismans. The Lesser Key of Solomon has got a lot of information about angelic and demonic forms of magic. The demonic I'm of course not going to talk about, but I will show you this. These are figures for keeping the demons away. This is a protective circle that you can stand in to keep the demons out, and this is a triangle, which if a demon is evoked into this, it cannot leave the triangle, and it protects you from the demon. This figure features in the first season of Supernatural, so there's a little bit of trivia for you. There's other stuff in here about the Ars Paulina, various zodiacal angels that you can summon, stuff like this. When I learned what a Seder table looks like, I suddenly had a better appreciation of this particular diagram. And you'll notice as well that there's certain things in here that look kind of Enochian, which suggests that there was an influence upon Dee, at least in part, when he was developing his Enochian magical system. I'll see if I can find it. Here it is, the Ars Almudel. How similar does that look to the Holy Table? I mean, come on. So yeah, another very influential magical text. So influential, in fact, that even Dee was influenced by it. And the final book in my bookshelf is the Picatrix. Admittedly, I haven't really looked at this one a lot, but it's another classic of occult literature, so of course it has to be there. This was originally an Arabic text, and it's been very influential on various medieval and early modern magicians. It's basically astrological magic, which was influenced by earlier Near Eastern religions. So another very important magical volume. So that is it. That is the grand tour of my bookshelf. This video has gone on for longer than I expected or wanted, so I might leave it there. But hopefully there's some books here that you're thinking about maybe exploring yourself if you're interested in Western esotericism. And hopefully I've given you some extra information in this tour. And if you want any of the books that I covered in this video, I will leave links to those, affiliate links to those in the description below. But I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel to support my work. If you want to support me further, hit join to become a member, or thanks to leave me super thanks. You can also support me by buying merch at my merch store. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.